Okay, here we go with Chapter 2, Communication Development. We're just going to do the first half of the chapter in Part 1 here, and then we'll do Part 2 in a separate lecture. So, Chapter 2 is Communication Development, and we're going to start off by talking about communicative competence. This is the knowledge and implicit awareness that speakers of a language possess and utilize to communicate effectively in that language, right? So, and it's more than speaking in grammatically well-formed sentences. It's the speaker's skilled navigation of both linguistic and pragmatic elements of language, right? So you can learn Spanish in a book or from using an app or something like that, but then if you actually go to the country, to Spain, or you go to Mexico, or you go somewhere else where they speak Spanish, all of a sudden they're using different words, they're using words in different ways. So even if you have the linguistic part down, there's the pragmatic, and how they actually use the language can be really, really different. So, how we can be competent as communicators is much more than just, do we have the words of the language and what they mean? So we're going to talk for a little bit about linguistic aspects of communicative competence. So phonological competence, grammatical competence, lexical competence, and discourse competence. Phonological competence is the ability to recognize and produce the distinctive, meaningful sounds of a language or phoneme. So, are you able to produce all the speech sounds of a language? And let me skip down to the last part here. When infants arrive in the world, they are ready to distinguish among all the sounds of the language. So, when they hear people talking, they can distinguish between a d and a b and an R and an L, but that if there's not a meaningful difference between those sounds, they're going to start to lose the ability to hear it. So if you take someone who grew up in an Asian country, where often the sound or R and ul or L is one sound. It's not, they don't have separate R and L sounds. And you say the word car and the word call, those two are going to sound the same to that person because there's never been a reason for them to be able to differentiate between the and the ul sound before. So they're going to lose the ability to actually hear it and distinguish between those two sounds. Phonological competence. Children achieve receptive phonological competence within their first year, right? So again, they're able to hear all the different sounds, understand the different sounds. However, they're not going to be able to produce all the sounds yet. An infant's vocal tract is not a miniature version of the adult vocal tract. As the child grows, the vocal tract is going to change in shape and size and all these different things. So an infant's vocal tract actually is more like the vocal tract of a chimpanzee than it is like an adult human, and it's going to take time for it to grow and change over time. So that's part of the reason why young children can't make all the speech sounds from the very beginning, even though they can hear them and differentiate between them. We've got the idea of phonological processes. This is a normal phonological deviation that young children make in producing specific sounds and words, and thus are context specific. So a phonological process, some children will leave off endings of words. So cat might be cat, dog might be da, a cup might be ka. Right, so they're leaving off the endings of words. That can really be normal for very, very young children, and only as they get older are they going to start putting on endings of words. There's also the phonological process of fronting, where I'm going to make sounds that are used with my lips M, B, 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 P, 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 P. I'm going to make T's and D's because that's in the front of my tongue, but I'm not going to make K and G's because that's in the back of my mouth. So children will often front and not have any K's or G sounds until they're about 3 or 4 or 5. So that would be a phonological process where, you know, I'm fronting, I'm not making my back sounds yet, and it's normal, you know, for young kids not to do it unless, you know, time goes on and they're still not able to do it when they're 5 and 6 years old. Grammatical competence, the ability to effectively recognize and produce the syntactic and morphological structures of a language. All right, so there's a big difference in meaning between Jim is hitting Bob and Jim is being hit by Bob, right? Those mean two completely different things. So being able to understand the grammatical structure of the sentence and what that word means is really important. So that's grammatical competence. We've also got lexical competence, the ability to recognize and produce the conventional words that the speakers of a language use. Important ages for this are 6 months and 12 months. So children will be able to recognize words at 6 months. So they'll be able to know what a dog is, what a cat is, what food is at 6 months. And then they'll be able to actually use words at around 12 months of age. So usually kids will speak their first word at, you know, a little bit before or around 12 months, but they are able to understand and comprehend some words as early as 6 months of age. Then we've got discourse competence. That's the ability to relay information to others fluently and coherently, and, you know, to understand meaning. So let's look at the pronouns here in this example. My friend Jen once took a trip to the island of Corfu in Greece. While there, she joined her friends in swimming through the dark cave, which they later learned was called the Canal d'Amour, because legend says that if a woman swims through it and passes a man swimming in the opposite direction, they will fall in love. All right, so my friend Jen, my is me, took a trip to the island of Corfu in Greece. While there, she, okay, who is she? We're talking about Jen, joined her friends, whose friends? Jen's friends, in swimming through the dark cave. They learned. Who's they? Well, Jen and her friends, right? So you've got to really understand, you know, and you've got to be able to produce these, and you've got to be able to say, you know, I need to be able to say my friend Jen before I start talking about she and her, or no one's going to have any idea who I'm talking about, right? So we've got to be able to produce it in a way that pronouns make sense, and then the listener has to be able to understand pronouns and how they make sense. Then we've also got pragmatic aspects of communicative competence. We've got functional competence, sociolinguistic competence, interactional competence, and cultural competence. Functional competence is the ability to interpret the social meaning that language conveys and to choose language that is socially appropriate for communicative situations. The basic purposes for communication are to request, to ask for something, to reject, to say no to something, or to comment, which is basically everything else. So those are our three main purposes for communicating. Sociolinguistic competence is the ability to interpret the social meaning that language conveys and to choose language that's socially appropriate for communicative interactions. All right, and this includes the idea of speech register, the variety of speech appropriate to a particular speech situation. Right, so here you may speak really differently to your friends and to your parents and to your professors, right? So how you talk is going to vary depending on the situation you're in and who you're talking to. So the ability to interpret the social meaning that language conveys and to choose language that's socially appropriate. So Right? What kind of language is socially appropriate for your best friend might not be socially appropriate for your professor. The kind of language you would use at a party might be really different from the kind of language you would use in the classroom, right? So being able to understand that and interpret that idea. And a lot of these are really related. Interactional competence is the ability to understand and apply implicit rules for interaction in various communication situations. So in Japan, some children may not initiate conversation with adults. That, adults are supposed to initiate the conversation and children are supposed to be more quiet. And people of all ages may avoid direct eye contact, where it might be rude to do that. However, in most people in the United States, children frequently initiate conversation with adults. It's kind of expected that that's fine, and then Americans generally consider eye contact to be a sign of sincerity or competence. So, often not making eye contact is considered rude, whereas in different countries, making eye contact would be considered rude. So that's interactional competence. And we've got cultural competence, which is the ability to function effectively in cultural contexts, both by interpreting behavior correctly and by behaving in a way that would be considered appropriate by the members of the culture. So it's related to what we just talked about, but it's really the cultural understanding of the attitudes, values, and beliefs of that culture. So do you have an overall understanding of what the culture values, what they believe, and what their attitudes are? We're going to finish up here with part 1, talking about the earliest foundations in this communicative competency. We've got joint reference and attention. We've got rituals of infancy and caregiver responsiveness. And then later we're going to talk about infant speech perception and categorization. All right, joint reference and attention. We've got developmental phases. Number 1, attending to social partners. So having a new baby can be rough the first couple months. Maybe the first 2 months is hard. You don't get smiles, you don't get laughter. You're just sort of changing diapers, taking care of them, but there's no sort of attention to the social partner. After around 2 months, you start to get smiling, you start to get laughter, you start to get eye contact. So the child starts to attend to their social partner. Then we get the emergence and coordination of joint attention. So if I'm giving my really young child breakfast and the dog comes into the kitchen, I'm going to say, oh, look, the dog, and I talk about the dog and use the word dog. And if I'm looking at the dog, the child will then look at the dog. So that's joint attention. I'm looking at something, the child turns to look at something, and then that's really important, because if I'm looking at the dog using the word dog, right, that's how that child's going to know that the dog is the dog, when they hear the word dog a lot when we're looking at the dog, right? Children with autism are often much later to develop joint attention, so they're interested in their own things. So they might be eating and like what they're eating, so they're just eating. So I'm looking at the dog and talking about the dog, but they're looking at their food. So they're hearing all these words about the dog, but they're looking at the food. So there's no connection then that the dog's the dog, because they have no idea, because they're just focused on what they're doing. The transition to language. So again, at 6 months, they're going to start to understand words, put words together. At around 12 months, children will be able to use words on their own. And that the idea that joint attention then leads to intentional communication, right? That, oh, I'm looking at the dog, I'm talking about the dog. If we're playing ball, I'm using the word ball. We're both focused on the ball. Right? They're going to learn language, and then they're going to be able to use that language to request the ball, to talk about the dog, to talk about the cat. All that really cool stuff is really, really important for children learning and using language. Rituals are also really important too. Infants' lives center around the routines of feeding, bathing, dressing, and sleeping. While dressing, parents talk to their children. Although they're too young to understand the words completely, they benefit from hearing the words over and over again, right? So if I'm putting a shirt on my very young child and I'm saying, oh, put your arm in the shirt, now put your other arm in the shirt, okay. Oh, let's put your legs in the pants, get one leg in, okay, let's get another leg in, right? They're hearing the word shirt, they're hearing the word pants, they're hearing the word arms and legs, right? So, and we're doing this we do this every single day, right? We put socks on every day, on your feet, socks and shoes, and so it's that ritual over and over again every day, right? And every time we're putting on pants, we're talking about pants. So those things must be called pants, right? So those rituals are really important in children learning language. And then related to this is the idea of phonotactics. And phonotactics is the study of the rules governing phoneme sequences in a language, right? So children start to be able to differentiate one word from another, partly because we have rules for how what sounds we can use in different words, right? We can end words in RS, right? We can open the doors and close the doors. We can do, we can have our words that end in RS, and floors and doors. However, we can't start a word with RS, right? A word can't begin with the phoneme sequence, right? That's not a beginning, that's only an ending. So phonotactics also give clues to children. They start to pick this up as far as, oh, right, that's the ending of one word, the beginning of another, and they start to be able to differentiate words from words, right? That's why sometimes if you're listening to someone speaking a foreign language, you can't even tell sometimes where words begin and words end because you don't know the phonotactics of that language. You're not used to it. So it sounds like just a quick stream of words, whereas, if you understand the phonotactics of that language, you are able to easily differentiate one word from another. Then there's also caregiver responsiveness, and this refers to caregivers' attention and sensitivity to infants' vocalizations and communicative attempts. And key indicators in here are going to be waiting and listening. So I might ask a question and I might just wait and be quiet and give them time to come up with a sound, or right, we're going to follow the child's lead. We're going to start joining in and playing and being face-to-face, so we're making eye contact, talking together, are going to be all things that are going to help children learn language, right? That I might make noises, ma, 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 and I'll give the child a chance to make that ma, 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 da, 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 right back to me. Right, and if the child's interested in something, following their lead. So all these things are going to be really important for learning language, caregiver responsiveness. All right, so that ends part 1 of our chapter.